The 1985 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft is on the air. Hello again, everybody. I'm George Grand, along in New York City with Paul Zimmerman of Sports Illustrated and Paul McGuire of ESPN, as well as Sam Rosen of ESPN. And when we each and every year sit and get ready for the beginning of this 1985 draft, there always is a lot of last-minute shuffling, and that certainly is the case at this hour. There have been talk during the course of the last couple of days of possible deals in the first round. And as we await the first pick in the first round of the National Football League draft, you know that Bruce Smith has already gone to the Buffalo Bills, and in fact they have signed, sealed, and delivered him. But there is discussion as we await the draft, which will come up in just a minute or two, of possible deals. We already know one thing that has transpired during the overnight hours, and Paul Zimmerman, that is that Chip Banks did not show up for his physical with the Buffalo Bills. So Chip Banks will stay in Cleveland, and the deal will mean that there'll be a shift in slots in that first round.
Well, Cleveland gives up the #1 pick and keeps the Pro Bowl linebacker, which is a scenario that Cleveland greatly preferred. You know, you don't want to give away all pros, especially young ones like Banks. And I can just see Ernie Accorsi now saying, Chip, all right, you got the script right. I do not want to go to Buffalo. I will not leave Cleveland. They're repeating it. Okay, you did fine. But what it means now, as far as the Bills are concerned, is they gave away, all they're getting is the #1 draft choice for the best quarterback in 3 years. That doesn't seem very good for the Bills.
So Cleveland ends up with Bernie Kosar, who, of course, by now you're well aware of the fact that he will be taken in the supplemental draft by Cleveland. That deal has already been made, and they still get to keep Chip Banks. So for them, so far, at least the scenario at this point in time, looks like it has been successful. Paul, how do you see it?
Remember what Sam Rosen did yesterday? Well, we had the draft show about the Buffalo Bills #1 picks. Well, you've got Bruce Smith, who is here, who is extremely overweight. We saw that. And now they lose what they thought was a great trade in the linebacker, Chip Banks, and I agree totally with Paul, and maybe the only time today that I'm going to do that. But I agree with Paul Zimmerman today, because, God, why wouldn't you keep Chip Banks? And you know, you've got an established all-pro football player, a guy that's already been seasoned. Now the Buffalo Bills are going to get a draft choice, another #1 draft choice. But remember, he's only played college football, George. He's not played the pros like Chip Banks. So are we back to the same thing with the Buffalo Bills to find out how their #1 draft choices turn out? You know, I kind of wonder about this.
The other factor that we're waiting on at this moment is word that possibly Atlanta and Minnesota have been talking about that second pick. Bruce Smith already goes to Buffalo in the first pick. Minnesota right now owns the second pick. If Atlanta were to move up for that second pick, who would they take?
Well, to me, that doesn't make any sense at all, because Minnesota has this player, Atlanta has this player. Why trade? I mean, if Minnesota wants this player, why give him up? Fraley could be the only name that makes sense, but, I mean, they know who Houston's going to take, unless they're afraid Houston's going to switch gears and get off Childress. But that trade doesn't make any sense at all.
The way it shapes up at this point in time, at least it looks as if that second pick with Minnesota would be Fralick, the big offensive lineman from the Pittsburgh Panthers, but that's something that we're going to wait and see on during the course of the next couple of hours. Now, to briefly let you know the way this thing will be developing, the first pick in the draft, of course, goes to the Buffalo Bills. That is Bruce Smith, and that has already, of course, been signed, sealed, and delivered. He's already signed his contract. Secondly will be Minnesota. The first round of the draft will get, each team will get 15 minutes to make their selection, and then after that, the second round will be 15 minutes for each selection. After that, it'll be 5 minutes for each selection to the commissioner, Pete Rozelle, and the first selection of this 1985 draft.
The 50th annual NFL selection meeting is now in session. First choice, first round, belongs to the Buffalo Bills. Buffalo selects defensive end Bruce Smith, Virginia Tech.
There's an upset.
No surprise there, and obviously Bruce Smith, as he was here last night for our preview show, is in the building today, and he will be here for picture-taking session, and of course with the commissioner right now. And as you can see, he's a pretty big boy.
Bruce Smith is the building today.
They got 1 for 1.
You know, I was just thinking, George, if Buffalo was going to trade for Chip Banks, you'd think they'd check it out with him ahead of time and make sure he was going to come. I don't think they did their homework.
Bruce Smith certainly is regarded in this particular draft as one of the top 3 or 4 specimens to come up in the draft. Childress is the other fine defensive end prospect that certainly is regarded as highly as well.
Oh, they're all specimens. That's what steroids do for you.
Now, I think Paul hit it on the head. You know, when you look at a #1 draft choice, and they're always looking for something wrong with a individual. If there is one thing that they say about Bruce Smith that may be wrong, is that at some point in time, he gets lazy in a ball game. And the interesting thing about it is that now he's the #1 pick of the Buffalo Bills, and they had plenty of time to do that because they knew they had the #1 pick, George. But every time you talk to a scout or anything, the first thing they say to you is, we want the best athlete. Is that right, Paul? We want the best athlete. Now, if he has these knocks on him, then obviously he's not the best athlete. But we will see in Buffalo. I think he's going to go in with a good defensive line because they have Ben Williams and Fred Smerlas, and they put Bruce Smith in there with him. They're going to have a pretty good defensive line, and they're going to stay with the 3-4.
Buffalo has made its selection. Minnesota is up next. Zim, who do you feel Minnesota will take?
Fralick. Possibly Eddie Brown as an outside choice, but I think they're going to go for the big lineman.
Okay, we are sitting and waiting for the Minnesota Vikings selection, unless, of course, they do work some kind of a deal, as it has been rumored possibly, with the Atlanta Falcons, as we await the Minnesota selection in round 1 of the National Football League Collegiate Draft. We'll be back after these messages.
National Football League draft continues, and good morning. I'm Bob Lee. With me here in the studio, Mel Kiper Jr. and Chris Berman will be here throughout the day, putting things into perspective, perhaps painting the broad strokes as we are awaiting the second pick in the draft, whether it will be Minnesota, and whether indeed it's going to be possibly, even gentlemen, a 3-way deal, because we've heard several different things. First off, Bill Fralick's agent the other day, in fact yesterday, made it plain, and Fralick said it as well. I'd like to play in Atlanta. I'd like to play in a warm weather climate. So whether the Vikings have been scared off by this, we shall see shortly.
Well, it's more than that. Minnesota has the history, of course, Bob, of not paying their top draft choices more than veterans make. And, of course, other teams go the other way. And, Mel, you know that Fralick and Al Toon really are a package deal in this, and that Toon's agent is the same one as Fralick's, and he's worn the Colts, right?
We'll see what an impact Ralph Cindrich has on this draft right away. I think Minnesota wanted Fralick. I know you talk about Indianapolis. They would have taken out Toon, but he wrote a letter to Irsay stating he didn't want Toon to play with the Colts. Same with Minnesota. So we'll see if those two teams shy away from Fralick and Toon. We'll see if Cindrich had a direct impact on the draft.
One thing we should look at right now is that Minnesota will probably take the full 15 minutes, because our understanding was that yesterday a half dozen, maybe 8 teams were talking to the Vikings. We've talked about Atlanta making an offer. Dallas was burning up the phone lines last night, Mel, and that trade could involve Danny White if it happens.
Sure, Minnesota was interested in Kosar at one time, as you know, and now if Danny White is available, because Hogaboom is the #1 quarterback likely, and I think they are interested in trading up and possibly obtaining Eddie Brown.
Last question for you, quickly. Ernie Accorsi, is he really ecstatic about getting Chip Banks back, or is Cleveland not as big a winner as it would look on paper, and Buffalo not as big a loser?
I think, first of all, both teams tend to lose in a deal like this. You know, you look at Buffalo, what they would have received at Chip Banks. Now they have the 7th pick, and they can get an outstanding cornerback. Derek Burrows would be a major addition to the Buffalo Bills if they obtain him with the 7th selection. Cleveland, on the other hand, wanted a wide receiver like Al Toon to go with Kosar, be a compliment to Kosar, giving that deep threat he needed. And now they have to convince Banks. You know, you have to rehabilitate his mind. Now he has to come back to Cleveland, a team that initially wanted to trade him to Buffalo. So I think it's a situation where both teams tend to lose here.
And, of course, they told Curtis Weathers, so he gets to move in the starting job for Banks, and now I guess he gets to move back to the bench, Bob.
We are waiting on the second pick overall in the draft. Bruce Smith has been announced. He's already signed his Buffalo Bills contract. Minnesota is next up, to be followed by Houston, then Indianapolis. The first 2 rounds, if you're a fan of the draft, you know you've got 15 minutes. There could be a trade brewing. As many as 8 different teams have talked with the Minnesota Vikings. One of the teams, as we have mentioned, Atlanta. Bill Fralick, who appears to be the overall #2 pick in the draft, as we said, has said would like to play in Atlanta. Atlanta has needs. They could use Fralick. They could use a quarterback. They could use a wide receiver. Their needs and their history. Here's David Sullivan. Dave?
The absence of Billy White Shoes Johnson was most apparent in the Atlanta Falcons' inability to generate a consistent deep threat. The loss of Johnson also had a severe effect on the Falcons' return game. Hence, the Atlanta Falcons will be looking to Eddie Brown as the answer for a sorely needed home run threat. Falcon quarterbacks were under constant threat of physical punishment last season. Dan Henning needs to address multiple problems up front. The once vaulted offensive line can no longer provide even adequate pass protection. Atlanta needs a strong offensive tackle, a quick offensive guard, and some depth at center where Jeff Van Note's status remains unresolved. If Henning expects to survive the length of his contract, which is up for renegotiation at the end of this season, the Falcons will have to profit just as much from the investment in premium offensive talent as the defense has prospered from the recent acquisition of Rick Bryant, Mike Pitts, and Andrew Province, all of whom were premium round selections in the club's last 2 drafts.
So right now you have to believe the Minnesota Vikings have a lot of phone lines open. They may all be tied up, and we'll see exactly whether they utilize that trade, whether they go for Freilich out of Pittsburgh, or whether a trade has worked, whether it is Dallas involved. But let's take a moment and look at the #1 selection in this draft, Bruce Smith, and there have been some knocks mentioned already about this young man, but with 4.7 speed, a defensive end out of Virginia Tech, the 1984 Outland Trophy winner, and defensively, on the collegiate level, he really was the best in the country the last couple of years. Came on as a sophomore, and when you get to this point and you know you're going to be a first-round selection, and everybody knows it, Mel, it's the same thing in the secondary, especially in the trenches as well. You get double and triple team assignments, so he was able yet to show what he could do this year.
He was, Bob. When you look at Bruce Smith, he played against some rather weak opponents this year, and it's tough to motivate yourself when you know you're a top player each play, and I think that was the problem with Smith. He showed us signs of laziness on occasion, but overall he's a great pass rusher. Will bolster Buffalo's defensive line, give them probably one of the better front sevens in the league, potentially, even though they won't have Chip Banks.
Let's explain our scouting system. Each different position on the field, offensively and defensively, 4 different categories. The top grade in each category is a 5.0. Top player, your perfect football player, is a 20.0. Strength, quickness, defending against the run, and also rushing for the pass. That's your defensive line category, so a 4.8 in strength and quickness, and an 18.9 for Bruce Smith out of Virginia Tech, the #1 selection. There are 6 minutes and 20 seconds now remaining in the selection process for Minnesota to either make a trade or make their selection. By the way, if you're scoring at home, we do this every year. The length of the first couple of rounds, where each team has 15 minutes, 8:02:20 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time is the moment at which the first round got underway and Bruce Smith was selected. How much money Bruce Smith can expect to make, or he's already signed his contract, will be an interesting factor, because the NFL Management Council has already recommended to owners, and with the changing economic face of football, that the folks that are going early in this round may not be making what the folks that went early in last year's 1984 first round will be making. We'll step aside for just a second. 5:49 and counting on the selection.
National Football League Properties Incorporated, a proud sponsor of the 1985 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. Welcome back to the Omni Park Central Hotel in New York City. Minnesota is down to 4 minutes remaining of their 15-minute allotted time in this first round of drafting activity. You're looking at the Minnesota desk, and Gary Christensen and Larry Bowie, who are both there, trying to get things straightened out with the home office. And obviously, as we've been talking about overnight, there had been discussion. It could be Atlanta, although Atlanta has not indicated that they were in talks with Minnesota.
See those phones there? Dallas is on the yellow one. San Francisco's on the blue and white one. Atlanta's on hold. They're getting a busy signal.
And significantly next to them, the Houston Oilers are right next to them. They're on the phone, too. And the Buffalo Bills at the far end of the table. Kevin Walsh, who just made his selection at the far end, is looking on, too. So it's heavy phone activity.
The Houston guy's talking to his bookie right now.
George, you know, the biggest problem is that, you know, when you talk about the draft, to have the #1 pick. Well, when Buffalo takes Bruce Smith, that puts it in Minnesota's hands, right? Now, they've got the #1 pick in the draft, really. And of all the players and of all of their needs, they've got to make sure they make the right choice. And everybody is anticipating it's going to be Freilich. But all of a sudden, to take 15 minutes after knowing that you have the pick,
Trade means trade.
then it could mean trade, right, Paul? Or he doesn't know how to write very well.
Yeah, well,
he's written one card out already, and he's waiting on his second card. But we should mention this, that usually what happens, if it is close, most of these representatives, and in some cases they're equipment managers, in some cases they're front office workers, in some cases they're just friends of people who either own the club or in the front office, but they usually will write maybe 2 or 3 cards and then pick the card that they want at the last moment. In fact, one year we had a situation where someone picked the wrong card and handed in the wrong card. That was Sean Farrell.
Why does that card there say Dear Pete at the top?
I was talking to Paul about it, so it's just something for information for the people here. Is it, George, now, if, say, Minnesota does trade with Atlanta or with whomever, Atlanta does not get an additional 15 minutes, do they? I mean, they have to decide who they're going to take.
You still get your...
No,
the 15 minutes is allocated from the start of a team's pick to the end. Right. Now, if they don't make that selection in that 15-minute period, they don't lose the selection, but the next team comes up and the next team would be allowed to make their selection.
What I'm saying to you is, what if they trade to it? If they trade to Atlanta, right?
Well, it's 15 minutes for the slot.
No matter what.
No matter what.
Atlanta must make the choice, the trade, and Atlanta wouldn't have already have their pick.
They've got to talk fast.
That's what I want to do. See?
It has happened maybe 3 or 4 times in the last few years since we've done the draft where the 15 minutes has expired and then the card has gotten in after that. And you don't lose the draft pick, it's just that you lose your place in line, so to speak, so that the next team up. Sure. And if it's the second pick in the draft, if it means between Minnesota and Houston, that certainly could be a very significant pick. But here we are sitting waiting for 50 seconds plus in the Minnesota selection in the first round. Houston will follow, then Indianapolis, then Atlanta, then Detroit, and then Buffalo in the first round of selection.
If they pass the pick because they run out of time, I might laugh myself sick.
This could be the start of what we anticipated might happen a lot on this day. A lot of wheeling and dealing of selections in this first and second round.
I just saw him say Dallas. I saw his mouth form the words.
So when you look at it, this could be the start of what could be a very interesting day. Here's Commissioner Pete Rose.
I have a trade. Watch. We'll say I have a trade. No, we have a trade.
But right now, he doesn't have anything.
No. Come on, Pete. Your time's run out.
You're down to 5 seconds, George. There we go.
Here's the Commissioner.
All right. Minnesota temporarily passes.
Oh.
The third choice is Houston, obtained from a trade with Minnesota. So Houston is now up.
Okay, so there, once again, you don't lose the selection, but you, if, say, Fralick is the man in question, although Houston is not expected to take Fralick, if Fralick was a man in selection, Houston could take that athlete.
They could buy time here because they know who Houston wants, so they're getting extra time to work on either Dallas or
Now they're up. Now
Atlanta.
Minnesota's up next after Houston.
Right. If they make their selection, yes, within the next 15 minutes. We should point out, too, that most of these teams at this point in time, especially Minnesota and Houston, because they have had significant discussions over the last few months and, of course, the swapping of the positions, most of them know what each one is going to be doing in this first round in terms of athletes they'll be looking at. Houston has already passed on a card. We're waiting for the commissioner and his announcement.
All right, on the second pick, Minnesota, through Houston, trades.
I knew it.
Its number 1 choice, the Atlanta Falcons, and they, Atlanta gives up their first in this draft and their third in this draft. Falcons give up their first and third in this draft for the Minnesota choice, the second pick acquired from Houston. And Atlanta selects Bill Fralick, tackle, Pittsburgh. Houston is now up. Houston Oilers. Houston now picks. Houston picks on the third choice of the first round, Ray Childress, defensive lineman from Texas A&M.
Right.
Next up, the 4th selection in the first round. Next up, Atlanta. However, they've just traded that pick to Minnesota. So it's the Minnesota choice through the trade with Atlanta coming up next.
See, George, I told you that Minnesota-Atlanta trade didn't make any sense.
So here we are once again. The draft so far has gone, in terms of the athletes, about the way we expected. Bruce Smith, of course, was the number 1 selection. Bill Fralick, who was expected to be taken possibly by Minnesota, instead was taken by the Atlanta Falcons. The big offensive tackle from the University of Pittsburgh. Ray Childress has been selected by Houston, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M. Those are the first three selections, so no great surprise so far.
Well, didn't Freilich say that he didn't want to go to Minnesota? He said, of all the people who have talked to me, Minnesota's the only team that did not talk to me. I just do not go to Minnesota, and maybe that is why that deal was made. He didn't want to go there, and if Minnesota, if they don't take Freilich, and they take another offensive lineman, then everybody's going to question it. This way they got out of taking Freilich, and they can save themselves.
Childress, Freilich, Smith, three of the top, certainly 5 or 6 athletes available today.
Yeah, and Eddie Brown is the fourth.
He may go next up. We are waiting on the next selection in the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. First three selections already made. Bruce Smith, Buffalo. Atlanta takes Bill Freilich, the offensive tackle from the University of Pittsburgh, and as expected, Ray Childress, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M, goes to Houston. Let's check in with our comrades at ESPN headquarters.
Thank you, George. I think it's significant to note that yesterday the Houston Oilers were in a position to possibly delay this National Football League draft. They were thinking of going to court and trying to obtain a temporary restraining order, this over the Bernie Kosar situation, and the fact that the Oilers did not get to keep the second-round pick they originally had from the Minnesota Vikings as part of the deal for the swap of positions. And, of course, the Vikings were left out in the cold as far as Kosar is concerned. He goes in the supplemental draft. We'll have time to talk about that through the day, but one of the reasons that Houston did not decide to file, according to their public reasoning, that Minnesota was not willing to join them in any litigation. For a few moments there, possibly, the Oilers could have really stuck it right back to Minnesota, possibly, and taken Freilich. They didn't. Atlanta worked the trade. Atlanta has Bill Freilich. And here's a young man who was the first freshman at Pitt since 1973, and Tony Dorsett, to start every game of his career. And you know that Pitt had a poor season this past year, but it didn't really show in Freilich's play. He never won the Outland of the Lombardi Trophy, a guy who can bench press 450 pounds, can blow people off the line, has been fairly healthy his entire career, a 5.12 time, not a great time, but has good short speed, has had some elbow problems and some shoulder problems as well, but the best offensive lineman in the draft. Atlanta needed some help in that department, and they certainly have it 10 times over with Bill Freilich. They traded up to pick in number 2, Mel.
They allowed 67 sacks last year at Atlanta, Bob, and Freilich will step right in. Of course, you have to remember also that Atlanta's going full cycle with the offensive line. They already signed 2 USFL linemen, Wayne Radloff and Jeff Keywell. So that's 3 young linemen going to be stepping in to a team which gave up 67 sacks last year, leading the entire league.
Well, this is a young man that we knew would go very high in this draft a year ago when he was mentioned for all those awards, and we've done the next best thing to being there. We have Bill Freilich on the phone with us right now. Bill, good morning.
Morning. How you doing?
How are you? You got your wish. You're not going to Minnesota. You're going to Atlanta, a team that definitely can plug you right in and start. How do you feel now that all this wheeling and dealing is over? Has it hit you yet?
Well, I hope things work out as good as I hope they did. I was excited to see that. I didn't know what was going to happen there after the 15 minutes were up, but you know, I think things are going to work out fine, and now it's all up to me.
Phil, had you been or had the Falcons been in contact with you all along here? Did you have an idea that they definitely were one of the teams, even though they didn't have the pick, were one of the teams that was trying to work a deal with Minnesota to obtain your rights?
Well, I knew there were a bunch of teams trying to work with Minnesota to get a draft pick, you know, to switch things around, but I wasn't sure if it was going to be me or not. You never really know what's going to happen. I knew they had an idea of that, but I didn't know as of last night that anything had happened, and I guess it didn't happen until the draft.
Bill, was it a monetary reason primarily, or was it just your preference to play in Atlanta with the climate and a different program, or was it economics, the reasoning that you did not want to play with the Vikings?
Well, their past history has shown that they're not one of the better players in the league, and that was a big part of it. Also, I'd rather go somewhere with a warm climate. Those were mostly the 2 basic reasons, and you know, there are other things involved, but that was basically it.
Well, you've got a warm climate. You've got a team that definitely wants you, and congratulations on being the second pick overall in the draft and a new member, I guess, after the signing's over, Bill, with the Atlanta Falcons. Thanks for talking with us very early in the morning.
Thank you.
Okay, Bill, thank you very much. Bill Fralick, drafted by the Falcons, and we've known that he was a blue chipper for about 3 years now.
4 years ago in this very studio, I interviewed him as the Parade High School All-American Player of the Year. And
then 5 years now.
5 years ago,
he was a blue
actually.
chipper.
Yes, Bill Fralick, number 2 selection. We'll step aside for a moment. The clock remains running on Minnesota for the number 4 pick. Overall in the first round, Bruce Smith signed by Buffalo. If you've just joined us, Atlanta has traded up with Minnesota, taking Bill Fralick. Houston selected Ray Childress as expected. Minnesota is next to pick, to be followed by Indianapolis. Round 1 underway. You're watching it live on ESPN. We'll step aside again, get back to New York, and also check out the West Coast. And here in the Sports Center, Football League College Draft continues here in the Sports Center, along with Chris Berman and Mel Kiper Jr. I'm Bob Lee. There are 6 minutes, 40 seconds remaining right now for Minnesota to pick in the number 4 slot. They have traded down to do that. And just prior to that selection, Houston picking overall in the swap of positions, of course, involved with the Minnesota Vikings. Ray Childress was their selection, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M. A young man who actually, by his sophomore year, really was well known. Had some knee problems back in this current season of '84. Missed a couple of games, but carries only, I guess when you get the instruments on him, only 11% body fat. A player of impact, really, Mel.
Oh, yeah, he's a 450-pound bench press guy, goes 275, and as you mentioned, only 10.7% body fat, which is incredible for a player his size. You know, great pass rush potential. Didn't play that well in the Hula Bowl, but he came back the following week. And the Hula Bowl is more a vacation for the players. He's a great prospect. The only difference between Smith and Childress is the fact that Smith is slightly a better athlete, but Childress is probably more consistent.
Well, Smith is really the only one that had a time in the 4.7s among the defensive linemen like this. Childress, we've known for a long time, was going to go this high. Houston, it's a homegrown guy. Texas A&M, and let's face it, Ray Childress is a guy, now this is a cliche, but when you hear it from scout after scout after scout, you have to use it. A man with big heart. I guess the time is running down on Minnesota. If they go down to the last minute, they'll have to pull the goalie like they did the last time, Bob.
Vikings are up to be followed by Indianapolis. Bear in mind, Buffalo picks 7th, clock down to 5:22, and let's get back to George.
Thank you very much, Bob. You can see the clock running, just a little over 5 minutes left. You can see the Minnesota table. And the reason why those phones are changed is because the phone lines have been hooked up to the wrong phone. So the Minnesota phone is hooked up to the Oilers phone, and the Oilers line is hooked up to the Minnesota phone. So there'll be a pick sooner or later, but it'll be on the wrong phone line. We're standing by with Sam Rosen, who has a name that's very familiar. We're talking about Childress and defensive football. When you talk defensive football, you talk the Pittsburgh Steelers and Mel Blount, who's now part of the NFL family. Sam?
One of the all-time greats of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Mel Blount, who was a third-round draft pick back in 1970, played 14 years with the Steelers, so you don't necessarily have to be a number 1 to make it big in the NFL.
Well, Sam, I can remember back when the draft came in 1970, I was thinking that I would be a number 1, and I think that's only normal for ball players to feel that they should be a number 1 draft choice. But I think the thing that's important for players to realize is that it don't really matter what round you go in. Once you get into training camp, everyone has an equal opportunity to make the team, and the most important thing is go to camp in good shape and go there to learn. Don't go to camp to get in shape, but go there in shape and ready to learn and compete. And players who go in with that kind of attitude usually are the players that are chosen to participate on that particular team. But the draft is just a way of selecting players. There's no indication of who's going to make it and who's not.
Financially, though, it helps to be up top.
Well, it's no question about it, but it's unfortunate that they only have 28 players who can go in the first round. So those other players are just as important to the ball clubs as the number 1s. And like I said earlier, it's only normal. I can remember when I came out of college, I thought that I should be a number 1, but I went in the 3rd round. But that had no bearing on me making the team at all.
Mel, you're now with the league as Director of Player Relations. Tell us what you're doing.
Well, my role basically is to go around the colleges and talk to ball players about the importance of education. Let players know what the National Football League is looking for and expect out of their players. One of the things we try to do is educate the players about the drug issue. We want players to come into the league who can make a contribution to the league and represent their schools and represent themselves. I think as professional athletes, we have an obligation to our community and to this country, and especially our young people, to be upstanding citizens. So what we're trying to do now is just clean up the image of the professional athletes in general. And so that's one of the things I do, along with working in the community, working with corporate people, trying to find jobs for ball players. So it's kind of a diversified kind of a job, and it's very interesting, challenging too.
The drug issue is still a big one that you're dealing with?
Well, I think it's always a big issue, not just in professional sports, but in our country. And as professional athletes, people with influence and people that other kids look up to, we have an obligation to make sure that we keep our act clean.
Mel, thanks for being with us. We've got the next pick coming up. Let's go back to George Grand.
Thank you, Sam, and to NFL Commissioner Pete Rozelle in the Minnesota Vikings selection.
After the trade with
Here comes another trade.
Atlanta,
Watch.
the fourth pick on the first round is Minnesota's choice. Minnesota Vikings select Chris Doleman, linebacker, Pittsburgh. Indianapolis Colts are up.
Fine linebacker out of the University of Pittsburgh, Chris Doleman. And when you talk Doleman, you're talking a year when the outside linebackers certainly are predominant this year, and here's one.
Yeah, he's a projection, too. He's a down lineman that's projecting to linebacker. And there used to be a rule of thumb, when you're drafting this high, you take sure things, not projections. And I think Indianapolis is just shocked that Eddie Brown is still here, and they're gonna jump on that before anybody changes their mind.
This is signal from Bud Grant, who's back in Minnesota now, about the needs of this Minnesota team.
I don't know. I don't know who's running their draft, whether Bud is or somebody else. I would think so. You know, he wants bulk, he wants beef. When you look at the way they played last year, they couldn't stop anybody. It makes sense if the kid is that good, but he's a projection.
Paul, Minnesota goes with defense once again.
It's no surprise to me that they're going with defense. I can't believe this shocks everybody. I think even you can hear the crowd in here, George, just went, oh, wait a minute. Because Chris Doleman, as Paul said, he is actually a down lineman, and they're thinking about a 6'5", 250-pound linebacker. Either they got to beef him up and play defensive tackle. I don't know if he's got that great a speed to play the linebacker, except
he's
maybe
fast. He
can play the inside linebacker more so than the outside.
He's never played it, though. I mean, you know,
that's
you're
true.
shooting at him from all angles.
Yeah.
He's never played that position.
And to use a #1 draft choice on a man that you're going to change a position, it just doesn't make sense.
Well, unless they think that physically he's so overpowering that he'll just be great wherever they put him. And obviously they do if they pick him this high.
Keep in mind, this is a Minnesota team, offensively speaking, offensive line speaking. Last year they gave up a total of 65 sacks. They were 25th of the year. They don't go to offense, they go to defenses. Bud Grant returns to Minnesota as the coach. We'll be back with ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1985 draft after this.
Cleveland, so Buffalo Browns, it also may change the predictability of further picks down the road. Maybe the first domino has tumbled, and we'll see what other picks are changed by not a wide receiver, but a linebacker, and a questionable one at that, going to Minnesota. And that Chris played, of course, on the line at Pitt. Pictures of the past years go through your mind when you think about many of the questions of the draft and many of the draft selections that have raised some of the questions in the past. Steve Sable has a look back to the 1950s. Some picks are good, some are simply atrocious.
In the draft's formative years, it was not an uncommon practice for NFL executives to get information on college prospects by paging through football magazines and reading newspapers. Computers and scouting combines were still a long way off. But someone must have dug pretty deeply into their Street and Smith's grid guide in 1956 when they uncovered what still remains the strangest #1 pick in the history of the NFL draft. 4 Super Bowl trophies are a testament to the excellent drafting record of Art Rooney's Steelers, but it wasn't always that way. Back in 1956, Pittsburgh's #1 was an unknown named Gary Glick. As you can see from these old newspaper clippings, this choice stunned the pro football world.
I was surprised and dazed when the Pittsburgh Steelers took him as their bonus pick. We had bonus picks there, which was higher than our first-round draft choice. He was about a 5th or 6th round draft choice, ability-wise. The only place he could play was defensive back in the NFL, but he lacked speed. Great college player, but not a good pro player. The Steelers were hard up in those days, football players, so they figured, well, this guy punts, kicks field goals, plays quarterback, plays defensive back. Probably we can get 2 or 3 department is in one guy from him. That's the way they figured. But they didn't figure his lack of speed. We all make mistakes.
Within a few years, Glick was gone and remains today the most puzzling selection in draft history.
And the clock continues to run on the Colts. Chris Doleman has been selected by Pittsburgh, or I should say by Minnesota, out of the University of Pittsburgh program, projected possibly as an outside linebacker. And whether he can make that transition from the defensive line at over 7 tackles a game. Entered college, actually, as a tight end, but began on the defensive line as both a freshman and a sophomore. Began to pick up that consistency as a junior. Has good speed. He's under 4.7, actually 4.68.
Oh, he had a great game against BYU opening day until he sprained his ankle. Lewis Wong really clipped him, sprained his ankle on that play. The rest of the year, he just wasn't himself. At the one All-Star game, the Senior Bowl, he left, and they wanted to play him at a down defensive end position. A lot of people thought he had a bad attitude. What he really did was he wanted to play linebacker. He knew he was a linebacker and was not accustomed to a down defensive end position. So really, a lot of scouts upgrading for showing that confidence to leave. And as far as his speed, outstanding. It's very rare that you see a 6'6", 250-pound plus linebacker at under 4'6".
And look, and obviously they picked outside because Matt Blair, who has been such a fine professional for all these years, can it be he's in his 12th year, Mel, and also Fred McNeil on the other outside linebacker. So he definitely fits into what the Vikings need, but then again, the Vikings need a lot of things. But as Zim hit it, this is a projection. There are a couple other players like this. So what we've had now in 3 of the 4 picks are pass rushing specialists. Childress, of course, Bruce Smith playing the down lineman, and Dolman at linebacker. When I was at the NFL meetings in Phoenix a month ago, all the teams, especially the contenders, said, we really want a pass rusher. With the way the liberalized rules are these days, the defensive backs can't do much with receivers. The only way to stop a passing game is to get to the quarterback. You saw the Niners do that against Miami. That's why Marino was ineffective. The Vikings have a long way to go to be like the Niners, but that's where they picture Dolman.
Well, let's see what happens as far as the predictability of the draft, whether other selections are changed now that Dolman has gone, and the offensive, I should say the outside linebacker selected by Minnesota. We put the question to him recently about his strong points and what he felt he could bring to an NFL team, and that NFL team will be the Minnesota Vikings.
Right now, I think I might be able to help the team as being a young player, being really enthused about playing the game. I love the game. You know, you played it for 4 years for fun, and now's the time you can make a little money at it and get after it a little bit more.
Well, Dolman will have to confront with Mike Lynn in that front office, something Bill Fralick did not want to do. The Colts are about to pick to be followed by the Lions. Let's now get back to New York City.
Welcome back to the Omni Park Central Hotel in New York City. We are waiting on the Indianapolis Colts and their selection, the 5th selection, and this is the first round of drafting. Bruce Smith has already gone to Buffalo, to Atlanta in a trade with Minnesota. Bill Fralick, the offensive tackle from the University of Pittsburgh. Ray Childress, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M, went to Houston, and then Minnesota took Chris Doleman, the linebacker, out of the University of Pittsburgh. We're looking at the Indiana Colts table as they're getting ready to make their selection in this, the first round of National Football League drafting competition in 1985. Still to come through this first round, remember, each team gets 15 minutes to make their selection, 15 minutes in the second round, and then from then on it is 5 minutes per round. Starting last year, instead of having the draft on 2 separate days, they went straight through, and we'll wrap up the draft sometime around 3 o'clock in the morning Eastern time come Wednesday morning. Zim, Indianapolis, it has appeared right from the beginning that they probably would go, if it was available, for some wide receiver help. But there had been talk, in fact, you thought they'd possibly take Rutgers of USC.
Yeah, I thought they'd take Rutgers if Eddie Brown was gone.
Right.
But here's Eddie Brown, and here they're waiting. So obviously they have second thoughts about Eddie Brown. As I so casually said before, they're going to jump on him right away. Well, they're not. So the name of Rice or Rutgers or even Altoon could be popping in there. You know, everybody thinks this is a great science. That you know, there are no arguments, but they argue right up to the pick.
You're talking about the defensive side of the ball arguing for who they want, the offensive side of the ball arguing for who they want to in any team. It's true, and I'm sure that discussion went on in Buffalo with the selection of Bruce Smith right from the top.
Yeah, you look at need, George, then you look at best player available. All right, now when you're in this part of the draft, and we all know Indianapolis, they need wide receivers. And you look at that's their need. Of course, they also need a quarterback, but that is really their basic need. You've got the 3 top receivers. Now, the question is which one are you going to take? And according to Paul, which I agree, Eddie Brown is the natural selection.
All right, we are sitting and waiting for the Indianapolis Colts to make their selection here on the first round. It would be the 5th player available in the 5th selection. Dave Sullivan is standing by with a look at the Indianapolis Colts now that they have a brand new coach and a new outlook going into the draft.
Even though he was fully aware of the chaotic kind of coaching carousel that Robert Irsay conducted over the past decade, Rod Dowhower finally succumbed to his head coaching ambitions. Not surprisingly, Dowhower is noted for his innovative approach to the passing game, which sparked the revival of the Cardinal attack, paced by Lomax and Green. He found himself endorsing Irsay's goal of bringing the Colts playbook up to date with the offense of the 1980s. So then, if forced to choose between filling a glaring need for a game-breaking wide receiver to complement Raymond Butler, or an even more pressing requirement for immediate improvement in the defensive secondary, it will be the Colts' passing attack, which benefits from the 5th selection in the opening round. Additionally, Dowhower is keenly aware that no matter whom he selects as his starting quarterback, the incumbent Mike Pakel or Irsay's favorite son candidate Art Schleister, there is a definite need to upgrade the quality of the team's pass protection. Finally, there's the matter of coming to terms with the team's top draft picks. The defection of Coleman for the USFL marked the 2nd year in succession that the Colts failed to sign their top draft pick. But at least they were able to salvage the John Elway fiasco via the acquisition of Chris Hinton.
And the Indianapolis Colts have made their selection. The card is in the commissioner's hand.
The Indianapolis Colts select their choice on the first round, Dwayne Bickett, linebacker, Southern California. Next up, Detroit Lions.
The Lions are now in turmoil. That was their pick.
That's who they wanted. There was no doubt about that.
And Dolman was the second choice for the Lions. Bickett was their pick. Now they have to switch entirely, get away from linebacker, think of either running back Ethan Horton, because Billy Sims, of course, is coming back from the operative knee, or go for one of those wide receivers.
How about defensive backs? Here's a team that was very porous in the defensive backfield last year. The opposition teams completed over 60% of the passes against them.
Talking about Detroit?
Yes.
I'm choking because the 3 wide receivers are still here.
Yeah.
You know, this happens. Every now and then, it happened to Hunter, the tight end from Notre Dame a few years ago. He was supposed to be the 4th or 5th guy picked, and then he plummeted on draft day. Now it's happening to the wide receivers, but I never thought this would happen. This is the big upset of the draft.
We went into the draft feeling that we were in a situation where there would be a few linebackers taken, and already we've got Chris Doleman of Pittsburgh and Dwayne Bickett of USC taken. Bickett, of course, and Jack Del Rio, 2 of the fine linebackers listed, and as we discussed during the course of this past week on SportsCenter and also on our draft preview last night, it is a point in time where Bickett has surpassed some of the other linebackers who were rated higher than he during the course of the regular season in college football last year. Sam Rosen is standing by. Let's go back down to the floor at draft headquarters.
For the club personnel, repeating that Twix number, 710.
A little bit of technical difficulty. We'll be getting back to Sam in just in a moment with Bruce Smith, the #1 pick in this year's draft and the signee already of the Buffalo Bills.
I told you he'd go.
ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1985 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft will continue after these messages. We're waiting on the Lions. You can see the look from above the fan gallery here at the 1985 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft, looking down on the floor where Commissioner Pete Rozelle is waiting for the Detroit Lions selection in this, the first round. Fred Otto is along there with Tom Lesnaut as they're waiting on the word from the Lions headquarters, and of course a brand new coach and maybe a little bit of indecision right now as to who they're going to select in the first round. Dwayne Bickett just picked by Indianapolis. A lot of people thought the Lions might take Bickett. Standing by is Sam Rosen. We've corrected our technical difficulties. Sam's there with the man of the day, Bruce Smith of Virginia Tech.
Thank you, George. And Bruce got me a new microphone, so we're back in business. And Bruce, certainly the last couple of weeks, a lot of attention has been given to Bernie Kosar. Now the limelight belongs to you as the #1 pick in the draft. It's got to make you feel awfully excited.
Well, it really does, and I'm glad it finally came because it's been, even though I've already signed, 3 or 4 months ago, it's really exciting to be here.
All right, Bruce, what was the turning point in your career? Now, you were a late starter in football. You didn't start playing until you were 15. What was the turning point for you that made you become a star?
Well, I believe the turning point was my desire and want to be competitive. That, you know, that's something that I've really been strong about, and I'm just glad that everything worked out good for me.
There has been criticism of you, especially of your weight, that sometimes it gets too high. Can you still maintain that high weight and still maintain quickness to rush the passers effectively in the NFL?
Well, I believe I won't be maintaining this high weight. I'll drop about 10 pounds, and I'll be as quick and as agile and as just about everything there is that you have to have a combination of to be a positive football player.
Okay, with the #1 status and with the big contract comes the pressure of trying to help turn around the Buffalo Bills team.
Well, there is a lot of pressure. There's been a lot of pressure for several months. And it's something that I'm going to have to adjust to, and I'm going to have to feel comfortable with.
I've got to interrupt you. The next pick is up. Let's go back to George Grant.
Thank you very much, Sam. We're waiting on the Detroit Lions. The card has been delivered. Here's the commissioner.
Detroit selection on the first round. The Lions select Lomas Brown, offensive tackle, Florida. Next up, Buffalo through a trade with Cleveland. It was announced earlier. Buffalo Bills next.
The second offensive lineman to be taken so far in this draft, as Lomas Brown is selected by the Detroit Lions. We'll be talking about that when we return, but let's go back to Bob Lee at our ESPN headquarters. Bob?
Okay, George, through 6 picks, we've had 2 offensive linemen and 4 pass rushing specialists taken so far. The quote, and I emphasize quote, the skill positions have yet to make an appearance. The reason I put it in quotes, the guys that aren't skill positions are 6'8", and they can make you regret calling their positions unskilled. But so far, we have seen Dwayne Bickett taken by the Colts. That put the Lions in the quandary. Lomas Brown taken by Detroit. That certainly put the Eagles in a quandary. So maybe more dominoes are beginning to go bit by bit. Dwayne Bickett, the selection of the Indianapolis Colts out of USC. Underrated, really. His first 3 years at school came on like gangbusters as a senior. 6 sacks this past year. Entered school as a tight end, switched over as a sophomore, 84 this past season, had 16 tackles behind the line, knocked over 13 passes away. Needs maybe to put a little bit more weight on that 230-pound frame, but he's real tough to throw over at 6'5".
He is. You know, he's great range and coverage. What he needs is a little bit more strength, but overall he was their most productive linebacker. Really was overshadowed by Del Rio early on in his career. He's really a better player than Del Rio was his junior and senior year. Finally began to get some publicity this year, and he deservedly should be a top player, Bob.
So the linebackers we grade out on strength, on quickness, on their ability to pursue the run and also cover the pass. The low grade was 3.8 for coverage, but we've got Dwayne on the phone.
Okay, yes we do. Like you said, the next one. Hello, Dwayne Bickett. Good morning. I guess we don't. We will have him on the phone in just a minute. Dwayne Bickett with now being drafted by the Indianapolis Colts, and perhaps a bit of a surprise, but Bickett is a fellow that is a blue-collar type, Mel, a player that he's kind of a throwback, isn't he? He's a throwback to your old-time workhorse football player.
He is. We talked about his range and coverage, and you look at that speed. He ran about a 4.92 at the combine workout, so it's no correlation there. He plays faster than that time would indicate. He feels the need for the Colts. I'm just surprised that they passed up Eddie Brown or Al Toon or Jerry Rice. 3 franchise wide receivers are still on the board, which is surprising to me.
All right, we've gotten cleared up our phone lines here. Let's get on the phone to Dwayne Bickett. Good morning. At very early top of the morning to you. Congratulations.
Well, thank you very much.
You were a little bit surprised to be selected by the Indianapolis Colts. Did you have really any inkling at all that they were scouting you a little closer than usual?
Well, I knew they were talking to me. I really didn't know for sure that they would pick me. I thought they were going to go offense, but, you know, they picked me, and I'm excited. I want to play. I hope things work out, and I'm sure they will.
I know you're getting in on a team that has a new coach, really, you know, second year in a city. Is that kind of prospect excite you, being on something not only because the team is trying to rebuild, but being on a ball club that's really new in its area? You can be from the ground up, Dwayne?
I think that's an exciting part of it. You know, it is a new coach in there, and I'm excited to come in there with the new people they have, and hopefully, you know, do my part. So I'm really excited to play, and I want to get in there.
Dwayne, you had been quoted, and tell me if this is right, that you had a definite idol as far as pro football goes, a rather famous linebacker. You used to play for the Bears, is that right?
Well, yeah, I think it's a lot of people's idol, but yeah.
Dick Butkus we're talking about.
Right.
Well, that's not a bad linebacker to pattern yourself after. I mean, I know that it took a while for you to get the recognition out there, but 5th pick in the draft, the Indianapolis Colts. I guess they had offensive problems last year. You may be on the field for a little bit, but you're the type of worker that doesn't bother, does it?
No, not on mine. You know, if I'm in the field, fine. I want to play, and that's the important thing.
All right, well, listen, I guess you get to go back to sleep out there. The sun might come up soon. Congratulations on your selection by the Colts.
Thank you very much.
All right, Dwayne Bickett with us on the phone from USC, and he is a ball player that, again, we said Dolman a linebacker, Bobby.
Right.
Now Bickett, maybe this is starting the dominoes on the linebacker side.
We made the point last night on our preview show how Bickett and Del Rio, who both played on the linebacking core at USC, went really in opposite directions in the eyes of the pro scouts. Bickett for 3 years, perhaps underrated compared to Del Rio, but Del Rio not a great senior year, and Bickett really came along. He has just been selected as the 5th pick of the draft. The Colts took him. Lomas Brown has gone to Detroit. Buffalo, if you're keeping score at home, picked 7th. That is because Chip Banks did not report to the Bills from the Cleveland Browns as part of the Bernie Kosar transaction. And so that Buffalo is up to be followed by Tampa Bay. The clock is running on the Bills. The clock is running on us. We'll be back in just a moment with our continued coverage. The 50th Annual National Football League Players Selection Draft. Then Philadelphia, then the Jets. Bob Lee in the Sport Center, along with Mel Kiper Jr. and Chris Berman. We'll have live reports from San Francisco, and very shortly we will be getting back to New York City. The Bills, though, with this wealth now, this unexpected wealth, they hold the rights to Jim Kelly. We haven't even touched on the topic of what the USFL situation may mean to this draft. It may yet become apparent. What will the Bills do?
You thought you had a good idea, but nobody, you know, it was very possible that these 3 top wide receivers, Eddie Brown, Al Toon, and Jerry Rice, could have all been gone. Now some teams are changing their thinking, I would think, and with the Jerry Butler injury up in the air, you know, Buffalo lost Frank Lewis in retirement the year before. Franklin played okay for him, but they had some problems elsewhere. They have to look at one of these, don't they, Mel?
I would think so. I think Cleveland's very disappointed right now. Eddie Brown was very high on their list. Of course, Buffalo looking at possibly a cornerback. You know, I thought that was their major need in this draft, was a pure corner. Derek Burrows was outstanding. I thought he was a top 5 selection. He's there. As is Eddie Brown, Al Toon, and Jerry Rice. It's tough. You know, you mentioned Jerry Butler. It would be tough to pass up Eddie Brown at this point, although Burrows is also a possibility.
Mel, what do the Browns... We were talking about this a moment ago. Now, the Cleveland Browns, who badly want a receiver to go along with the anticipated drafting of Kosar in the supplemental draft, now, essentially, what they have is a trade, Chip Banks for Eddie Brown, right? Since they don't have this pick, and they could have had their choice of any of the wide receivers.
You're right about that. Chip Banks should really switch to running back. He was very elusive the last few weeks. I think you look at Cleveland and Buffalo were out trying to corral him, and nobody could find him. So obviously he wanted to play with Cleveland, and that's obviously hurt both teams to a certain extent.
All right, the Bills still on the phone. They have under 7 minutes to go. Very quickly, the next few picks, we have Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, and the New York Jets. Tampa Bay has been giving out signs all along to everybody that's Ron Holmes, defensive end, Washington. Philadelphia, like Lomas Brown, now what do they do?
Well, you mentioned Ron Holmes. I think Philadelphia would go Ken Rutgers, offensive tackle from USC. Then we go to the Jets. One of those wide receivers has got to go. They're too good. They're franchise wide receivers, Brown, Toon, and Rice. I'm surprised San Francisco or some team at the end of the first round has not traded up. Chicago, San Francisco.
We may have one.
I think you will.
Or do the Jets surprise everybody and pick Freddie Joe Nunn? We shall see, but with those wide receivers out, Bob, it changes everything.
And the beef is being selected today, so far as we've said, the pass rushing specialist, Bill Fralick on the offensive line, and also Lomas Brown on the offensive line. And Lomas Brown selected by Detroit. We're awaiting the Bills pick. Possibly at times the attitude might be a question with Lomas. He'll go to minicamp, he'll begin working. We put the question to him recently, what sort of things does he have to work on to improve himself to be a top-flight pro? He'll be playing if he signs with the Lions.
Well, I want to work on my drive block a little more, And I want to work on my quickness, you know, setting up, because this is a lot of quick ends in the NFL, a lot of quick defensive tackle. So I think quickness is going to be important, plus your strength in getting off the ball.
That's Lomas Brown, the selection of Detroit. 4.5 minutes remaining for Buffalo's second selection. Of course, they took Bruce Smith, and we'll be back in just a moment. Continued coverage of the Bills with 4.5 to pick, then Tampa Bay, then Philadelphia, then the Jets. And that will take us through our first 10 selections in the first round of the National Football League draft.
NFL experience.
We are under 3 minutes left on the Buffalo selection. There you see Kevin Walsh, who's been here the last few years as the representative in New York City at the draft. Bud Thalman of the Bills is right behind him, and Sam Rosen sticking his head in there to try to find out what's going on, too. We can tell you that Jan Van Duzer of the NFL has come over. He was on the phone with the people back in Buffalo. That may be an indication that a trade might be in the works. It may be just a clarification of the eligibility of a player or a clarification of the selection process. But in any event, we know that NFL representatives have been discussing with people in Buffalo some aspect of this selection. And again, we're now just about 2 minutes and 8 seconds away from the pick. As the time goes, the speculation continues, Em.
It's mystifying. I mean, going into the draft, you had the 3 best wide receivers maybe ever in the draft. So the linebackers so-so. So now you've got 2 linebackers gone, 2 defensive ends gone, no wide receivers, and they're waiting to see if they want one of them or they want to trade it. It's mystifying. It makes no sense. I mean, if I were the 49ers, I'd jump in here in a minute.
There had been some rumblings that the Packers might have been talking with the Buffalo Bills for this pick. We'll see as it develops. Do you have any inkling, Magoo?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it went to the Green Bay Packers. They made a trade. You like that one, Paul?
Yeah, that's not bad. Bill Walsh said that he would trade the first 3 rounds of his first 3 rounds of the draft to get Eddie Brown. Well, here he is. He's got a shot. You just give up rounds 1, 2, or 3.
I think this is a perfect indication, though, of what we've all found out over the years, and that is that when you talk to player personnel representatives and general managers during the course of the pre-draft period, you get some names thrown around, but when you get to draft day, very often all that goes out the window for varying reasons.
You mean they're liars, is what you're saying.
George, think about something with the Buffalo Bills in this situation, and I am close to it. Jerry Butler is hurt, and everybody's discussed that. And they don't know whether he can ever come back or not. And there's a possibility later on this season. They need a wide receiver extremely bad. They also need a defensive back, somewhere a corner, a pure corner, and Paul has talked about that. That's true. Now you have the choice. You're sitting there, and you've got the 3 top receivers, and you've got all the defensive backs, all of them, to choose from. They'd trade it.
Eddie Brown's going to go in this pick. I mean, I'm going on the record. Eddie Brown has got to go in this pick.
The commissioner is waiting and ready to make the announcement from the Buffalo Bills. Will it be the Green Bay Packers? Let's go to the commissioner.
That's a trade. That's a trade conference there.
Jan Van Duzer and Joel Bussard.
Yeah, they're already
and obviously something is going on. You mentioned Green Bay. Of course, they've been shopping every place you look. They've been shopping JJ, Johnny Jefferson.
I think it's a wrong name because they look like they can't read it. Yeah, Pete's saying, how do you pronounce that? Is that Polish? It's not Eddie Brown if it's spending that much time with it.
We speculated before the draft started that this would be a day when there would be some wheeling and dealing and people trading up, trading down, swapping selections, and very much so. It looks as if that's going to be the way this whole day will be going.
In other words, we're doing a lousy job of handicapping.
No, you know, we touched on something last night, though, George, that what I said to you, the surprises in this draft is people jumping all over the place. Here it comes.
Buffalo's selection. On the basis of their earlier trade with Cleveland, they trade to Green Bay.
Ooh.
This first round pick of Buffalo is acquired from Cleveland. And their second in 85 this year. Let's see,
for a quarterback.
Yeah, and Buffalo throws in its 4th and 86. So you have Green Bay acquiring Buffalo's this pick and Green Bay's 2nd in 85 for this first of Buffalo's, and Buffalo's 4th and 86.
We'll have a quiz on that a little bit later.
Buffalo's 2nd.
So this choice is not, that has been traded from Cleveland to Buffalo, in turn now is traded to Green Bay.
Buffalo's giving up their 2nd pick, too?
Green Bay selects
2nd and 85.
on the 7th pick in the 1st round, Ken Rutgers, offensive tackle, USC. Next choice, Tampa Bay.
The offensive guard or tackle from the University of Southern California, Ken Rutgers, an athlete, Zim, who you thought very highly of coming into the draft.
Well, I don't know. Maybe he can run patterns like Eddie Brown can. Maybe that's what they're thinking of. I'm stunned.
They're keeping John Jefferson.
I mean, you know, it's amazing the way these guys plummet. All of a sudden, bad things come up on draft day, and a player who's projected as a 2nd or 3rd with the other 2 receivers to go within the top 8 or 9, they're all there. It's just amazing the way these things go in cycles.
Paul, obviously we're back where we started from now with Green Bay going for an offensive guard or an offensive tackle, depending on how they projected it.
Yeah, you know, it does boggle the mind. Now, here's a team that said we need a wide receiver because it's obvious that John Jefferson is not going, not obvious. Now, it's obviously maybe staying in Green Bay. John Jefferson, the fact that he wants out of Green Bay, they didn't want him back, whatever the case may be, to make that trade up to get a wide receiver like Eddie Brown, and then all of a sudden take an offensive tackle.
Well, you know, look at Forrest Gregg's bloodlines. What was he?
Offensive lineman. Yeah, that's true.
For those of you that are just joining us, to recap where we are right now, we are 7 selections into round 1 of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft for 1985. As expected, Bruce Smith was taken by the Buffalo Bills in the 1st selection of the draft. He is already signed. Bill Fralick, the offensive tackle from the University of Pittsburgh, was then selected by Atlanta in a trade with Minnesota. Houston then took Ray Childress, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M. Chris Doleman was selected by Minnesota, the linebacker out of the University of Pittsburgh. Dwayne Bickett, another linebacker, this one out of USC, selected by the Indianapolis Colts as the number 5 selection. The Detroit Lions took Lomas Brown, the offensive tackle out of the University of Florida, the 6'5", 285-pound 3-year starter, and just completed. Cleveland started with the pick. That was swapped to Buffalo. Buffalo swapped the pick to the Green Bay Packers. The Green Bay Packers have selected Ken Rutgers, the offensive lineman from the University of Southern California. We're waiting on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and then the Philadelphia Eagles. They'll be coming up next as ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1985 National Football Draft continues after these messages.